and girls. Welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument, hosted by the militant, Marxist, anti-Santa, Martin Bradbury. The Bradbury Group is streamed live on Rover, Sky TV, YouTube and Facebook. Proudly sponsored by Wātea, journalism you can trust. Let the arguments begin.
Kia ora Aotearoa. The true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal, progressive democracy is the 1% richest plus their 9% enablers versus the 90% rest of us. Welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the daily blog, Martin Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on this evening's show, the political panel all-stars tonight are Māori Party President John Tamihere, property editor at Business Desk Maria Slade, and political strategist, barrister and left-wing public academic Max Harris. Tonight's one-on-one in 10 is Professor Welby Ings on the radical NCEA changes. Shout out to Kiwi, Skirt and Chewy from BHN moderating tonight's YouTube page. Good evening to all the Bradburyistas online watching right now. Your comments will appear on screen as we go. Shout out to our Wātea Facebook, Rover and Sky TV whānau, and our Twitter panel this evening is Tim Selwyn and Jamie Dowley, and they will be arguing online at Twitter, hashtag the Bradbury Group. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. Okay, so Associate Minister for Health, Casey Costello, who once worked as a tobacco lobbyist, has now extended the tax break for heated tobacco products by another 2 years, which means Big Tobacco, the industry she used to lobby for, now has a $300 million tax break while our hospitals are underfunded to breaking point. Casey Costello may well be the very first Associate Minister for Health who's on the side of cancer. $300 million for Big Tobacco. Why are we paying those death merchants one goddamn cent? $300 million for Big Tobacco while nurses are striking? If only this government loved us, the people, as much as they love cigarettes. Talking of tobacco, Matua Winston announced legislation that would make New Zealand the official name of the country, because that's what's really important, eh? Passing laws making New Zealand the name of New Zealand. Not the 28,000 jobs we've lost, not the 70,000 Kiwis who have fled this country since this government's austerity project vandalised the economy. Does Matua Winston honestly think that by passing a law calling New Zealand New Zealand, that those 70,000 Kiwis will suddenly remember where home is and fly back? Why the risen Christ are we wasting 1 second on passing a law calling New Zealand New Zealand? As the economy is melting down and 600,000 Kiwis use food banks each month. New Zealand first, taking the Aotearoa out of Old Zealand. Grow up, Winston. And finally, in this week's War on News, a study out last week shows that extreme weather caused by climate change is raising food prices worldwide. By driving up food prices, extreme weather conditions can also worsen overall inflation, which can lead to political unrest and social upheaval, the researchers noted. The cost of a wide range of goods, from vegetables in California to coffee in Brazil, saw dramatic spikes in recent years due to weather conditions that were, and I quote, so extreme they exceeded all historical precedent prior to 2020. Brothers and sisters, we're all going to die on a burning planet thanks to the lives of the petro-industrial complex and their polluter mates. To quote the great warrior poet oracle Mike Hosking, happy days. The political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau, but first this week's one-on-one in 10 with educational academic Professor Welby Ings on the radical NCEA changes. Kia ora, Professor Welby. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Kia ora, mate.
Comrade, I was taken with the passion in your interview a fortnight ago on Q&A with Jack Tame regarding the role of public education and its purpose in an egalitarian democracy. You are an educational academic, an author, a professor, a film writer, and you have an enormous respect and mana in the field of teaching. So, firstly, what are your thoughts on the government's NCEA announcement?
Um, I look at it this way. That that announcement is talking about the gates at the end of compulsory education. And most New Zealanders will pass through that. Our generations will pass through that. So you have great care to take of those gates so that each person who walks through has their dignity intact and has grown the best version of themselves they can. So how you design those gates is really important. It has to be sophisticated, not fundamentalist. It's got to be able to um, enable a person to grow to the best version of themselves so they release the best version of themselves into an uncertain future. And so fundamentalist solutions to that, simplified, generalized things don't work. So NCEA, one of its advantages was it had flexibility, but it did become unwieldy. So it's our job now to make sure, one, that this doesn't get rushed through, and two, that we bring really good reasoned consideration to what happens to people who don't match the template.
Yeah.
What happens to them? So if you go, we're going to bring in exams, everything's going to have 50% exam, and you go, so how's that going to work out for visual arts? Putting people, if exam means putting people in a room with a clock ticking and 50 questions, how does that work for drama, for music, so we have to match however we decide to. I don't like the word examine. I would say externally assess. We have to find the right way of measuring different kinds of knowledge and different kinds of ability. And at the moment, we're given a very, very shallow picture of something that needs a lot more digging to. So I'm very proud of the New Zealand education system.
Yeah.
We have some astounding roots, especially in our understanding that we have to care for everybody to get the best intellectual health in our country. So we are as strong as our weakest point and as strong as our strongest point. And we have to, and given, that, so we know one of the major problems we face. So in 2018, when those stats came out, we were ranked 33 out of 38 in the OECD countries for uneven education.
Yes.
Some people get it. We are very low in the world with it. So we have many amazing things, but we don't have fairness.
You argued in your Q&A interview that public education has an obligation to empower everyone who is taught by it. And I was embarrassed by having to be reminded of that. Why have we lost sight of the common good public education builds in a society?
Look, I think for many teachers, they haven't. They struggle against a system. And so they're having to behave with kind of a professional disobedience to make something work. When you're in the intellectually intimate relationship with someone who's learning, policy actually is only an impediment or an aid. It isn't the thing that shapes learning.
Right.
That's the relationship between those people. So I think that sometimes policy, especially policy that comes from panic, when somebody says, things have just gone to hell in a handbag, and so let's bring in this solution, and when you lift anxiety in a population, you can bring in fundamentalist answers.
Right.
So the answer to that is take reasoned, considered, compassionate debate, and that's where media sits in. That's where discussion. And so going, well, let's do a quick turnaround on this is antithetical to what it would need. It would need reasoned, careful debate. And educators, parents, communities, they are more than happy to have that.
You challenged the concept of naked competition between students and made the point that we actually collaborate with one another in society. Can you expand on that idea and the type of educational system that creates it?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, let's put it this way. If I go to the doctor, I want diagnosis. I want to be the most healthy being I can. So I want a health professional who will give me a diagnosis, not comparative assessment. I want something to diagnose me. So if we understand that the role of education is not to provide workers to attract overseas investment and then create an economy that way, but is to grow the intellectual and social health of all New Zealanders,
Right?
then we would come into a world that was trying to not build the success of some people on the debris of other people's failure, but actually create a rigorously a rigorous system that worked to grow each individual. And that is not la la land.
Yeah.
This country has had people from all over the world come to see. It has one of the most socialized and discursive education systems in the world. So between the 40s and the 70s, people came over to this country to look at this extraordinary experiment.
Yes.
That arguably gave us a nation of high innovators, of people who can work outside templates. So I'm not romanticizing that. There was some awful racist stuff in there. There was a whole lot of bad stuff. But there was the idea that we have a responsibility to look after us, us, not the individual high flyer, because we have to live in a world of us.
Sure.
We live in a world where we get by working with strategic cooperation.
Yeah.
Strategic because we want something, and we're going to get that thing by being able to work well with other people, including people who we don't agree with, who have different ways of looking at the world. And so when you look at people who are, we call them leaders, or we call them great diplomats, or whatever, they are people who can work with difference. So they're not seeing the world adversarially as this is me taking on every individual who crosses my path like some bad video game.
Yeah.
You go, no, we live in a complex, beautifully complex world. And the skills we need is to know how to work with other people so we get the maximum out of a relational way of understanding knowledge. And that, we've been hugely resourced by Maori ways of knowing knowledge as relational, rather than discrete silos that you pick and you perform and you compete with everybody to try and come out on top.
Will we see a return to scaled grades that automatically fail some students?
It's up to us to stop that. So we have to stop that, because that is a toxic thing to do, because the simple point is that no matter what the assessment system you use, it will always be flawed. It will have some strengths and it will have some weaknesses. So when we rank people, that comes from what Todd Rose calls a Thorndyking system, a system which came out of eugenics, which said that people can all be ranked, and then you can peel off little groups to go to different parts in society. The opposite is the humanist view, which goes, it's no good ranking things that are fundamentally different to each other. You have to understand difference and work out how you grow the best of all those things to live communally.
What should our education system be doing? Creating critical thinking citizens or worker drones? Because all of the vocational talk I'm hearing just sounds like it's dooming some kids to certain roles in life, and they're not going to advance beyond that.
So, when I left school, I was unemployed for some time. I couldn't get a job. When I left school, I wanted a job. I can understand anybody leaving on, and especially if you go to university, then you've got loans to pay back. Of course we want a job. Of course that's a real thing. It is one real thing. Another real thing is that we want to be able to live in a world without dying in echo chambers and rabbit holes because we didn't develop enough ability to discern the truth from falsehood.
Yeah.
We have to have both of those things. So taking a purely an idea that education is there to serve an economic need is only understanding part of a question. If you only have that, you don't have a healthy society. And I mean, I'm uneasy about Roosevelt, but I always remember that thing that he said was what? To educate a man in mind and not in morals is to educate a menace to society.
That's beautiful. What do you say to parents and grandparents who feel frustrated at the lack of information NCEA report cards give them in terms of where their children are academically achieving? Because it seems like it's their feelings that are really driving this change.
It's also teachers are cobbled. Teachers who actually do know, who could tell them much more, are cobbled. Like, for instance, when someone says to me, how's my child doing? I know that what they're really asking is, how does my child learning?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me about my diagnose. Give me I mean, they don't use this word. They want to know how is Hemi or Sarah or Lily or Thomas, how are they learning? Because I look after their education outside of school.
Yeah.
So, but what happens in a system that becomes too obsessed with mapping people against milestones or imagined descriptors of intelligence or success is that the descriptions relate to the milestones and not to the learner.
Right. Is there a fear that reverting to grades will help establish league tables that enable charter schools at the cost of public education? Because David Seymour is very clear that his aspiration is that the majority of public schools in New Zealand become charter schools.
So David Seymour doesn't run this country. This country is run by people. And my view, so that's fine. He's allowed to have that view. But in fact, if you listen to educators, it's a silly view. We live in a much more complex society. We need more sophisticated thinking behind it. So we can, because education is one of our taonga. It's one of our precious things. We have to care for it like a precious thing. To do that, we can't use dumbed down boxes to try and shove it into. We've got to use flexibility and a mix. I think of it this way, as a mixture of rational, compassionate thinking. So we're always thinking of how is this doing? How does this work for the us? And then how does that at the same time extend the most brilliant uneven thinker and the gifted generalist and the person who's been damaged and is fearful and feels injured? How does it do all those things? And you can do it. So one of the fundamentalist answers is this other stuff doesn't work. It's just woolly woofter rubbish. It's not woolly woofter rubbish. This country actually has a long history of some very successful things based on a highly socialized education system, a highly discursive education system, a highly cooperative education system. It's led the world at times. So we're not some backwater group of people who have no, and we also have cultural examples of it. That is where knowledge has grown from these two great trajectories of scholarship, Māori scholarship and the European scholarship. They see the world broadly, differently. One is more relational, understands that there's a connection between the human being, between the earth, between ideas, between relationships, and the other one tends to be disciplinary. But they coexist. So we've got two lots of fertilizing coming into our thinking.
Finally, you have a book out right now, Invisible Intelligence: Why Your Child Might Not Be Failing. Where can people grab a copy?
I am the worst salesman, mate. My publishers would shoot me. I think it's in most bookshops, but yes. I definitely know it's at Unity Books because I walked past there today, and I'm going to sound like such a wanker. Forgive this, but it was the #1 bestseller.
It is. No. I'm so excited about looking forward to reading your book. Thank you, Professor. I honestly believe an educator and academic of your passion needs to be central in this NCEA debate. Kia kaha. Thank you, Professor. Pleasure. Okay, now to our political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is quite frankly too good for this show. One of the best and most respected business journalists in New Zealand, property editor at Business Desk, Maria Slade. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show.
Kia ora.
One word to describe the week, please, ma'am.
Terrifying. And that isn't me putting on a posh English accent. 15%. What did we do to them?
Yeah.
What did we do to them?
Yeah.
He's not going to be finished till he's ruined the world, is he?
Our next panellist is a political strategist, barrister, left-wing public academic, high-ranking Jedi Knight, and on Team Gryffindor. He's pretty much Harry Potter with a lightsaber. Ladies and gentlemen, Max Harris. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show.
Kia ora, Bomber. Nice to be on.
One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Solidarity, I think. Yeah, it was great to see workers come in support behind the nurses' strike. And I see a lot of groups working together to fight back against the government's agenda over the last week.
Amen. And last but certainly not least, he's a lover and a fighter, but mostly a fighter. Talkback host, Labour Party Minister, hero who sued Mike Hosking for defamation. Ladies and gentlemen, Māori Party President John Tamihere. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, word of the week's a rort. everything under this regime is just a rort. Like
one word to describe the week. This is rort.
Oh, it's a rort. Look, cancelling people from being able to vote. I mean, they're rorting the 2026 election as we speak.
Yes. How's the Tamihere by-election going?
Well, they're purging the system, right? Yeah. And so we're just working our way through that. But it's a rort. Like, everywhere you go with this regime, they're just screwing the scrum and rorting things. Like you raised the issue about the money going into the nicotine boys.
Yes.
Yeah. No. Well, you got your numbers are wrong. It's 230 million per annum.
Oh.
They've extended it out, so it's just under $1 billion.
Jesus,
so no. That's what Phillips Morris gets out of Winston Peters through Mr. Luxon signing it off.
It's disgusting. That's just
but it just keeps coming. It's a gift that keeps giving.
Right. Brothers and sisters, let's get into the show. Tonight's political panel topics are Issue 1, unemployment plus homelessness versus the National Party conference. How far removed from reality is Chris Luxon? Issue 2, NCEA versus competition versus the point of public education. Will our kids be better off? And Issue 3 tonight, FBI base in Wellington. What the hell is going on? Plus, we'll have a final word at the end of the show where each panellist gets to go to the mountaintop to see who breaches broadcasting standards this week. My bet, it'll be Maria Slade. Let's begin tonight with unemployment plus homelessness versus the National Party conference. Over the weekend, the National Party faithful gathered to worship at what passes for meritocracy on the right, with 28,000 jobs gone, 70,000 Kiwis fleeing the country in an exodus to Australia, food inflation outstripping wages, homelessness exploding, and business investment now so weak that banks have not lent any new money to non-landlord businesses and farmers since May of last year. With all that going on, our Prime Minister gloriously told us he would be doubling down on the austerity that helped create all this economic carnage. Maria, ANZ senior economist Miles Workman, in a research note this morning, warns the unemployment rate could rise to 6%. Is there a disconnect between National and the people their policies are impacting?
They just haven't come up with anything. They're relying on this, Chris Bishop says, well, just wait till we reform the RMA, allow all this development and then it'll all come right and it'll be beautiful. Well, it'll take them 10 years to reform the RMA if they ever manage to achieve that. And that kind of market forces will provide kind of idea. It's just not doing it for us at the moment. And they, as you say, the austerity has gone a bit far, in my view. Wellington, for example, has been decimated with all the job cuts that have happened there. They've got to put their hands in their pockets. No one else has got the power to kind of kickstart things other than the government by spending a bit of money.
Follow-up question. ANZ's Business Outlook survey for July found house builders' expectations slumped to their worst level in a year. And ANZ New Zealand Chief Economist Sharon Zollner said last week the building sector was tanking. As a business journalist, are you seeing the growth that was promised by this government? And what are businesses saying?
Construction in particular it has been really badly hit. All the numbers that are coming out, all the surveys, the industry studies, everything, they're all showing that it's really hard times out there. That a lot of people in the construction sector are saying it's as bad, if not worse, than the GFC.
Wow.
Yeah, and we know what happened then. House building just completely, consents went to their lowest level ever.
Are business angry with the government?
I think it's a whole convergence of factors. And the housing market too, you've got to remember, it's not just one amorphous market. Like in Auckland, for example, we've overbuilt.
Right.
So again, Chris Bishop's banging the drum saying we must intensify, we must build more of these townhouses that nobody seems to want.
Yep.
It does vary a bit around the country. Christchurch is not so badly hit. But, the construction sector in particular is just... Nobody's borrowing money to build new houses at the moment.
Right.
Because they're worried about their jobs.
Sure.
And so it has been a particularly hard hit sector, and there's no light on the horizon at the moment. The CoreLogic figures, or Cotality as they've now called themselves, figures came out again today showing that it dropped again, I think about 0.2% in the last month, and that's just been consistent throughout the year. So the housing market is going precisely nowhere. Which, some people would argue is a good thing, because that allows more first home buyers to come in, and it does. But house prices are still ahead of where they were pre-COVID, so it's not like houses are amazingly affordable. And people talk about a housing crisis or housing shortage. What we do not have a shortage of actual physical buildings to put people in. What we have a shortage of is affordable housing, building the right types of houses. Right. And there was a survey, actually, interestingly, came out from the mortgage brokers Squirrel just a few weeks ago. We did a wee piece about it. And they surveyed would-be homeowners about what they wanted. Yeah. And they do not want ticky-tacky terraced townhouses out in the wop-wops. Right. They want far better designed and more appropriate housing. So, we haven't got the affordable homes yet that people want.
Max, National will say they are dealing with Labour's overspending during COVID, but much of this bitter economic harvest is a direct result of National's policies. How long can National keep using this defence before the polls turn?
Yeah, I don't think the defence is very convincing. I think the figures on New Zealand's government debt show we have debt much lower than similarly situated countries. So I think debt sits somewhere around 42 to 43% of GDP. Compare that to 100% of GDP in the UK and the US. So yes, spending and debt went up from a very low base, but I actually don't think that excuse holds much water. And I think they can't go on much longer on the theme of homelessness. In Auckland, I think rough sleeping is palpably increased. One thing that I really notice in the area that I live in Onehunga, is the empty lots where National's frozen kainga order developments. And I think, a number of people have connected that to the stalling of the construction sector. And then you also have a whole lot of empty shops. And, even on the National Party's and the government's own measures, things like business investment and liquidations reflect a tanking economy. So I think liquidations were at a 10-year high at the start of this year. So I think they're not succeeding on their own terms, in terms of growth, which has been anemic, in terms of businesses doing well. They're not succeeding if you think the economy should serve the people and provide affordable housing, as Maria said. You think it should provide broader goods. And I think people are feeling that, and you see that growing concern with the government.
Follow-up question. The Salvation Army launched their half-yearly update of their National Homelessness Data Project last week, which showed the Ministry of Social Development's rejections of applications for emergency housing rose to 386% in the last year. Where are those people's interests in this debate about economic growth?
Nowhere, and I think they should be part of this debate. And so we saw Tama Potaka on Q&A several weeks ago, playing out this sort of charade of not wanting to accept that the changes around emergency accommodation might have contributed to increased homelessness. It seems more and more likely that there is a clear connection there, and I think we should be talking, also to Maria's point about kinds of housing, we should be talking about state housing again, and building state housing at scale. We know that in other countries and at other points in history, that if you get state housing being built at a large enough scale, you do start to bring rents down, as well as building more broadly. So I think that needs to be part of the debate. And we also need to be talking about those state housing tenants who've been evicted out of houses, moved out of communities, uprooted, whose lives have been really damaged and affected by these deeply ideological choices. We're not hearing those voices at the moment.
John, Social Housing Minister Tama Potaka last week blamed homelessness on people losing touch with their families. After amputating public house builds and throwing people out of kainga ora, can the minister really get away with pretending homelessness isn't a direct result of their government's policies?
Oh, no, look, Tama's a disgrace to his race. The problem we have there, let's get to the fundamentals. The fundamentals are this government started off with a very bad balance sheet and then proceeded to pay its mates off in regard to the dowry that they paid to its two to mates and themselves. And so when you expense $18 billion out in tax cuts to landlords, and when you expense nearly $1 billion to Philip Morris over cigarettes, and you add them all up, and then you put the handbrake on the economy, which you've just expressed, the reality is that your income in terms of tax payments tank. You've just had to borrow money to pay your mates off, and you're caught in a perfect storm of your own making.
Right.
Not of the Labour Party's making. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of the Labour Party. I think they're bloody disgraceful at times. But that's why I'm into Party Māori. But it's another story, you know. So you've also got to watch the numbers. I think ministers are playing games with a bunch of their ministerial roles,
right?
Particularly with MSD in terms of numbers of truly unemployed, because there's underemployment, which is huge.
Yes.
Right, and then once you get to underemployment, you're going to have to start to get a whole range of top-ups if possible, and then that hides the numbers.
Yes,
and you've got all this. For instance, in West Auckland, we've got NEETs kids, right? They're not in education, training, skills, or employment. That's gone up thousands, right? In South Auckland, it's around 24,000. Now, those kids got nowhere else to go but get into mischief.
Sure.
And then not just the austerity, but the clampdown on the poor. So you can't police your way out of poverty.
Right.
You can't jail yourself out of poverty.
Yeah.
And they're investing in new prison beds.
Yes.
Yeah, and in new cops. So all the investments going into deficit issues.
Yes.
And then they bring out all these magic sort of wands. NCEA's gone. Foreshore seabed's gone.
Yes.
Rareo's gone.
Yes.
And so what the government does is it targets people to take out their frustrations and hate on other minorities in the communities.
Yes.
Right? Whether they're LGBT, whether they're Māori, whether they're poor, so long as you can beat up someone under this government and get people to align with you.
Right.
As long as they're above those that are worst off, they're feeling good. But that can only last for so long.
Follow-up question. Wātea's press gallery journalist Claudette Hawati last week published a series of harrowing exposés with Rotorua's homeless and spent the night in a car with them. It was heartbreaking, her going over what was just the enormity of it. How bad is it out there for some whānau right now?
Oh, in winters it becomes, of course, it gets microscoped. And so that's a common occurrence out there. Now, sooner or later, they have to do things that are illegal. And
just to survive, right?
Well, they will. See, 80% of our women that are in prison right now are there through crimes of dishonesty and a whole range of other things. They're there because they have to feed their babies or clothe them.
Yeah. And
they're crimes of poverty.
Yes.
You see, now if there are crimes of violence and all sorts of other crimes,
different issue.
You get it.
Yeah.
But no, when the numbers are that high. Yeah.
Maria, 1.4 billion, that's the annual cost of Donald Trump's 15% tariff on New Zealand's exports. Our predicted growth rates were already anemic. How will tariffs impact the economy?
It's yet to sort of play out. I mean, that's probably worst case scenario, that number, because you have to understand that businesses they'll find different markets.
Sure.
Maybe they'll have high-end products that they can still sell into the US, that the US consumer will just pay that premium for it anyway.
Right.
So even if the price goes up a bit, they might still buy those products. So that could be worst case scenario.
Right.
There's a range of solutions to it, but it's not good.
Yeah.
It's certainly hurting at a time when, as you say, the economy is just kind of bumbling along. We're waiting for the latest numbers to come out. We could could be in a technical recession again, kind of thing. It's certainly not going to be much going the other way if it is a positive number.
Max, you are currently running a campaign for free dental. What are you seeing in the community in terms of poverty?
Yeah, so this is something I do part-time, and we work with a lot of people who tell stories of the shame and the stigma that's attached to poor oral health, and hearing more and more of those stories at the moment. The downstream health consequences of poor oral health as well, the way it can be connected to heart disease and diabetes and a whole lot of other heart conditions, a whole lot of other health conditions. I think that's just another burden on people on top of, food being expensive, power being expensive, the fact that all of the essentials of life are hard to meet right now. And this campaign Dental for All is about trying to say, why do we carve our teeth out from the rest of our body in our public healthcare system, and shouldn't we bring dental into the public healthcare system in a way that honours Te Tiriti o Waitangi?
Why is that? I've never understood why dental was not included in public health.
Yeah, it's not a good policy or medical reason. The main reason is that in 1938, when the public healthcare system was set up through the Social Security Act, there was a lobby at the time of some dentists who wanted to maintain their profits and incomes. And essentially the system has stayed the same since then. And so, it's not that there's any good health reason. It's not that there was, evidence or policy. It's been maintained like that. And we did some research in this campaign last year to show that with frank advice and commissioning an economist, that the costs of not bringing dental into the public healthcare system actually exceed the annual costs of paying for free dental. So as many people have told us, we think it's a no-brainer to make this change.
John, Māori unemployment is 10.5%. Māori youth unemployment, I couldn't believe this figure, is 19%. That's 1 in every 5 unemployed. Where's it going to be at the end of the year?
Well, if Pākehā people catch a cold, we get a flu, and it gets worse and worse and worse, right? So as soon as you see the unemployment number, you double it straight away plus. Yeah. Okay, then if you look at our underemployment... Yes. That is why around 66%, 67% of Māori, 1/3 of them are on the dole of some sort. Yes. And 1/3 are underemployed. Underemployed rather, and the other third are on a reasonable trajectory going forward. But even there's 20% of those that are in a tricky situation. Sure. What that does is that when poverty walks in the door, love goes out the window. Yeah. So a lot of our issues are based on just crawling out of under the pump. Right. Being beat up for being poor all the time by this government is just a senseless act. The deficit cost of locking someone up at $164,000 per annum in a corrections bed is just I don't get it. The cost of processing them, police, courts, and the like, and that whole trajectory. Once you rack up your deficit costs, from an economic perspective, it's the dumbest regime that we've ever come across, but it plays to its base. Right. Okay, which is the ugly, upset, really, really feeling angry white men. Yes. So we've got to try and work our way through that. Right. It's true. It's actually true.
There have been some good initiatives though. Like there was I can't remember what it was called, but there was the initiative that tackled that kind of hardcore group of kids that were getting into the ram raids. Yes. And it wasn't just about the ram raids. They were actually targeting them in terms of their whole social situation. Wraparound services. Yes, and they did have some really good results with that.
That's true.
I think Whānau Ora did most of that work, didn't it?
Whānau Waipareta in the northwest region is the most successful. Yes. You can confirm this with the Commissioner of Police there, Hassan, and she'll tell you that. So youth offending because of identifying your key operatives who then have a contagion effect up and down. If we can get to them first and manage them through back into some form of educational skills.
So then, healing rather than punishment, right?
Youth offending in West Auckland is a consequence of that program run by Whānau Waipareta, not by the state, for goodness sakes, has seen for the first time in 7 years youth offending drop. Preach. Right? Now, I invite you to ring the Commissioner of Police out there, Commissioner Hassan, and they will verify that.
Quick round. Is Luxon safe, or will he be removed as leader at the end of this year? Max?
I think National will think it's less safe to remove him, and that it'll look divisive. So even though he's not popular, I think he'll probably stay in.
Maria?
Yeah, I tend to agree. He's not really got the political chops. He's no John Key. But yes, they'd be a bit stupid at this point in the cycle.
John Hooton's making is already sharpening up the life.
Well, he did that with his.
I know.
Anyway, but Hooton's unhinged, so we'll leave it at that. No, the problem they've got is if not him, who else?
Right.
Yeah.
So they've got no successor.
Yeah.
Right, and if he's as good as it gets, they got some problems.
Right. Comrades, we need to move on to issue 2 tonight. NCEA versus competition versus the point of public education. The government have decided to reset NCEA in a radical move that everyone is still digesting. What is the purpose of public education in a liberal progressive democracy? Critical thinking citizens or worker drones? Max, Gen X parents and boomer grandparents have been frustrated. They don't understand what their children and their grandchildren are academically, thanks to the removal of an educational grading system they did understand. Is this political populism by National or a legitimate educational issue?
I think it's a little bit of desperation. I feel quite strongly about this because I went through NCEA relatively early on, and I'd also gone through a Cambridge system at year 11, and I had quite a positive experience of NCEA.
Yeah.
And the things I remember about NCEA is that it was skills-based or standards-based. And so, I did things like filmmaking as well as, critical engagement with sources and history as well as essay writing.
Yeah.
I remember that it was quite school-based and that, where I went to school in Wellington was able to look at local history and adapt some of these standards. And I remember there being a strong element of internal assessment as well as exams, and that being different from the Cambridge model. And I think that's positive because exams are very individualistic, and you don't work with others, to Professor Welby's point earlier. Whereas, you could work with others and learn cooperation, learn how to live in a community in some of the other work that you were doing. I think NCEA, was confusing for some that were familiar with simple scores, but actually it wasn't that complicated.
Yeah.
You had excellence, merit, achieved, not achieved. You also had NCEA scholarship, which worked on a kind of old school percentage model.
Yep.
And so I think perhaps the system needed some tweaking, but it served me well and my peers well. And I think this is a little bit of throwing the baby out with the bathwater in an attempt to grab some momentum. And I agree with Maria that really across a lot of areas, there's not a lot of positive policy coming out. And I think they're trying to grab something here. Maybe the very final thing I'd say is I feel very strongly as well that education should not just be about taking an individual up a ladder of achievement. It should be about raising us all up collectively. And I think you do that better when you try and build skills. And I think NCEA was actually doing a decent job of that.
Follow-up question. Papamoe College principal Iva Ropati argued the government had poorly understood the complexity of the modern standards-based assessment qualification and that their fix-it attitude will result in the complete demolition of a strengths-based approach to student learning and flexible pathways in the New Zealand context. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's an important point about strengths, which I think ties to your interview earlier. I think when you had a range of standards that could be flexible, you're more likely to capture a range of strengths in students. And I know this because, in my broader family, there's a range of people who did differently at school. And I think you also in an education system, as far as possible, want to avoid writing people off for the future or sticking a label on people and telling people that they can't succeed. And I think, I don't think this was just about, kind of awards for participation or any of that kind of caricature. It really was about, a range of strengths that you could assess through those skills-based, standards-based assessments. And I think I really worry about losing that if we focus on exams and go back to a narrower form of assessment.
John, as a Pākehā parent who put his Pākehā daughter into immersive Māori education since she was 5, I can see the difference between the competitive Pākehā education model and the collaborative Māori education approach. Do we risk losing those lessons if school simply becomes a tool to measure failure?
Oh yeah, I don't want to romanticise kura kaupapa and the like, but putting that to one side, what I'd say is clearly the numbers speak volumes that they're in a very protected, affirming environment.
Yes.
in my world, 50% of the kids who did not make the school C cut on 3 subjects had to go down to work as labourers in Rosebank Road industrial estates, right?
Right.
And it didn't matter whether they're black, white or brindle. There was a cut-off point.
Yes.
Okay, and away they went, and away we went.
Yeah.
Or you tried to get whānau that could get you apprenticeships and all that sort of stuff. So there was a cut-off where half the people in your community were deemed dungies.
Right.
Dummies, right?
Right.
So they went downtown to the labouring jobs, etc., etc. You see, the problem with going where they're taking it, it's all like clickbait.
Yeah.
Politics.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't look at the nuances required in a whole bunch of kids.
Yeah.
And I had a form of dyspraxia that I didn't know until I was about sort of like 11 or 12, and then because I couldn't do my shoelaces up.
Right.
So my sisters used to do that and beat up anyone that tried to intimidate me. But the point is that's the world we grew up. What NCEA did, okay, which was wrong, is as soon as you start to scorecard schools.
Yeah.
The problem that you have is that schools then start to game the numbers up in terms of credits earned.
Yeah.
That you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as has previously been said. You fix that.
Right.
With a better form of integrity measurements.
Sure.
Of the school processes.
Yep.
As opposed to blaming all the kids.
Right. Follow-up question. Is there an irony in the government pushing for vocational training when they're cutting off so many polytechnics?
Well, see, here's the problem with everything, whether it's investing in a new medical school for med students in the Waikato, or whether it's this conversation, no one has factored in the revolution that AI is bringing in right now.
Right.
So my staff that have had dyslexia and have really struggled with case note writing, as long as they're verbal, it's all over.
Sure.
They're now surfing ahead of everybody.
Right.
So with depending on what application you're using, within the next 3 years, whether it's social work, whether it's GPs who will now just be quality assurance measurers.
Yes.
Most other things will be delegated in terms of ancillaries.
Yes.
There's this revolution coming. And we've got all this nonsense going on.
Yeah.
Why don't we look at the impact of AI on our worldview and what's happening, and cast our systems around getting ready for that? As opposed to still going back to industrial age.
Yes.
Lessons.
Yeah. Maria, everyone wants the best education for our kids because society as a whole benefits from well-educated young people. But are we risking failure to those who will be left behind by these changes?
I must have a read of the professor's book. It sounds
He
really
is.
interesting.
Wasn't he amazing? That kind of person, that kind of passion, that's who you want driving the debate.
Yeah, really fascinating. However, I will counter his arguments with a point that Cameron Bradbury, the economist, made
Smart
the other
guy.
day. Yes, he writes a column for Business Desk.
Yes.
And he's a bit obsessed with education, which
He's
is
smart. He's a great guy.
unusual for an economist. Anyway, he quoted the 2024 OECD survey of New Zealand.
Yep.
And apparently an 8-point fall in the PISA measurements.
Yes,
I
that's
forget
right.
what PISA stands for, but you know the international survey,
That's right.
Equals a 1% decline in productivity.
Right.
New Zealand's had a 29-point fall between 2006 and 2018.
Wow.
And we've had COVID since then, obviously.
What's the evidence that links it
Well, this is
to the NCEA?
Well, this is him quoting the OECD,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
I don't
I
know.
get that.
Sure.
But I would just back that up by saying the idea that we are creating good people and good citizens is a wonderful, laudable idea. And I wrote a column just the other day arguing that we should be teaching our kids civics.
Right.
Yeah.
But you also need them to be able to be useful in the workplace. And AI, again, that's a great idea that it's going to run the world for us. But frankly, I don't want it running my job.
Yeah.
It's
going to.
No, it's not. It's a tool.
I guarantee it will.
It's a tool.
I haven't
And
looked at it properly.
it would be frightening if
Right.
it started
Yeah.
writing my columns for me.
Sure.
Imagine the kind of rubbish it would. I mean,
Yeah.
like, some people might argue I write
Not
rubbish.
at all, not at all. I won't have that said here. Quick round for everyone. 15,000 teenagers are working more than 50 hours a week to support whānau, while chronic absenteeism is at 80,000. How will these NCEA changes re-engage those students? Max?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that's been happening more and more in recent years. I think just a guess is it probably would make life harder for those people. I think if you've got more internal assessment stretch out throughout a year rather than everything focused on an exam, I think there's more flexibility built in for people that are essentially going to work at the end of a school day. But yeah, I'd like to think about that some more.
John?
Sorry.
How are those 15,000 kids who are working 50 hours a week to just support their whānau, how's this going to re-engage them in education?
Oh, look, it won't, because it can't. But the thing is that there's lots of other kids who will, through different avenues, be able to be reintroduced. Why? It's a more caring and loving environment. If for the first time you pay attention to our young people and don't see them as a problem waiting to be punished, but a solution waiting to happen, well, then you can build a different relationship. And as soon as you start to break down those things and you start to build a affirmative and positive relationship for the first time and to give them mana, well, then you start to get a totally different change process.
Maria?
Yeah, actually, that was something that Cameron Bradbury was writing about the other day too. The
Yep.
sort of persistent problem we've got of lack of attendance at school. It's just not really got that much better since COVID. And yeah, that's a real problem. That if they're going to bring in the changes, they've got to figure out some tools to manage these other problems that have come along with it.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 3 tonight, and that's the announcement of the FBI establishing a base in Wellington. As the New Zealand police fall increasingly behind the technical sophistication of South American cartels importing meth and Chinese shadow banking infrastructure that is financing the meth trade, New Zealand has begged the FBI to help. So, what's the price we will have to pay for that expertise? John, the Māori Party have a petition saying Yankee go home. As global... It is.
I don't think it's as overt as that.
It should be. It's pretty close. It's really close. So as global tensions increase, is now the time to look at the Māori Party's position on neutrality?
Look, we have to make a decision to declare the Pacific neutral, right? Militarily neutral.
Yes.
Furthermore, we don't want to be forced to say China bad, US good.
Yeah. No,
because and then what happens is that you start to sell your sovereignty.
Yeah.
Now, what's happened with the CIA is already in camp.
Oh God, yeah.
In every ambassadorship around the world, right?
Yes.
And they're already here through Five Eyes and a whole bunch of other things. So to overtly bring in the FBI as well, okay, it's just selling our sovereignty. And what we've got to do is, are we going to have a referendum where we sell our souls and become the 51st state of the United States, or are we going to hold on to our own sovereignty?
Independence.
And what does that? And what does that look like?
Yeah.
Military neutrality does that. I'm not saying get rid of a defence force. We never said that.
Right.
But we have said let us be the Switzerland of the South Pacific.
Right.
So I don't see that as a problem. And then we're not having to be gamed by putting our truck on the trailer where Australia goes, we go, and all that nonsense. Because that Anzac stuff's all bullshit now, right?
Yes.
And the other thing is this. You talked about tariffs earlier on in the broadcast. The only country that does not tariff us is China.
Right.
Australia always has.
Right.
The US always has.
China
the
doesn't.
EU always has.
Yeah.
And we start to have to understand that we're now part of Asia.
Yes.
We're not part of Europe and we're not part of the Americas. We're part of Oceania, Asia. And the sooner we wake up that that's where our destiny lay in regard to who we're going to trade with, who we're going to do business with, the better.
Maria, with Trump as president, why would we want to get closer to America? Come on.
I did think
He's insane.
Yes, true fact. I did think it was funny that they broke the story because they saw him wandering around the basement of the BO, and then somebody else saw the FBI plane at the airport. Welcome to New Zealand, Cash Patel.
Yeah.
Look, I think the FBI's got presence all around the world, and it's a good thing in terms of New Zealand trying to combat international crime, that we have those links.
Yeah.
I read a piece out of the Washington Post just the other day about Palau in the Pacific.
Yes.
And the US are busy trying to upgrade the harbour there to allow more sort of in and out of their military operations, but the Chinese are countering that with they've built a hotel overlooking it, and they're frantically buying up land, leasing land, because you can only lease land in Palau. And
is that a bad thing? Is that a bad thing?
Well, but crime has gone up there.
Oh, is that Chinese because of the Chinese?
the theory is that the Chinese are allowing or facilitating crime, drug running, and so forth through the Pacific. There's big problems with it in Samoa and Tonga, as we know.
Yep.
Exponentially growing problems, and with drug running and cybercrime and so forth. And we do need to counter
the yellow wave.
Those. I'm not saying that, John. I'm just saying
Barbara
this is crime. This is crime.
Barbara Dreamer's done a good piece on this.
No, but you've got no evidence that the Chinese government is running all that.
Well,
even if they aren't, somebody is.
Yeah,
that's true. We need to be able to tackle.
Max, short term, we might see a serious dent in the meth trade, but long term, we face the CIA protecting their interests here. Is that a fair exchange or a pact with Satan?
I wouldn't even assume that we're going to have those short-term benefits. I think there are process issues here and substance problems. So from a process perspective, foreign policy is this area where it just seems to be accepted that things can be done without democratic engagement. I think that's a real problem, and I think that's reflected in the pretty large protest that spontaneously was organised in Auckland over the weekend. I think people want a say in this kind of thing.
Yes.
And secretly, finding out that the FBI director was wandering around Parliament as this announcement is a bit embarrassing from a process perspective. So I think that raises process issues. Then from a substance perspective, there are some people that have said this is about law enforcement, but I think Kash Patel's announcement said this was about countering China, which was
that's right.
shut down by government ministers. And Marco de Jong, who's an AUT-based lecturer and writer, has done a lot of great writing on AUKUS, and his point is that New Zealand shouldn't become a staging ground for US power plays, that we shouldn't just be a platform for what the US is doing in its positioning. I think it's demeaning for us if we really want to maintain an independent foreign policy.
Can I just
jump in?
You recall both all of the contributors here. There was an end-to-end, one-day piece of legislation rammed through the House 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
Okay, that legislation had no case was made as to why that had to be rammed through.
No.
End to end without any contribution by any Kiwi. Right now, that legislation in effect has sold all of the solar space.
Yes.
That New Zealand had rights to Elon Musk.
Yes.
Because what it does is it makes illegal any competition should it arrive, right?
Yes.
Whether it's called Hawaii, right? Now, it can be only Hawaii because they're the only ones with the capacity and capability, and they're putting up an alternative system.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, hate the Chinese.
Yes.
Hate the Chinese.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, hate the Chinese and love the Americans. That cannot be a logical case for hating yellow people.
I'm glad you brought that up because no one's even looked into that. Comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. Maria, your final word this week, please.
Just to completely change the subject yet again, we had an interesting hearing last week at the Institute of Chartered Accountants where a Hamilton chartered accountant admitted, actually, wrongdoing regarding the Duval statutory management.
That's right, yeah.
Yes.
The events happened after it was put into statutory management, interestingly. She's put up a hand, said, yep, I did wrong. I think she was very naive in what she did.
Right.
However, it just annoys me that this poor lady from Hamilton has been sort of, pilloried over what happened, and yet the whole $306 million collapse, it's gone on for over a year. We still haven't reached a point of charging anyone over it, and I sincerely hope that process works its way through. I'll better not say anymore or I'll get myself in trouble. But yeah, it just sort of, she feels like a bit of a scapegoat just at the moment, and I would like to see more action.
Max, your final word this week, please, sir.
Might just mention this Dental for All campaign again, but connected to some broader issues. So we've got this roadshow starting next week in Porirua, and then Porirua next Monday, and then Wellington on Tuesday. But what we're hoping is it will open up a whole lot of other conversations about free public services and also tino rangatiratanga and te tiriti. We've talked about public education tonight. We have public healthcare, public education. But I think if we're going to be thinking positively and imaginatively, and not just opposing, what we have to oppose. We should be also thinking about kind of extending the frontier of those free public services and protection of fertility, which I think makes everyone's lives better.
Amen. John, your final word this week, please.
The economic case for free dental care is beyond reproach.
Right. Okay.
Must happen.
Yes.
Okay. How do we do it? Well, I hate to tell you this. There's a wealth tax coming.
Preach! Preach! You heard it here first, brothers and sisters. Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word. Brothers and sisters, you might be someone who believes that we need oil and gas exploration in New Zealand. You might argue that New Zealand needs jobs and that we still require oil and gas to keep our economy stable because renewables are woke. Now, I think that position is bullshit because oil and gas can't be any part of future because catastrophic climate change is a reality now. The 2% royalties are a joke, and investment really needs to go into making New Zealand 100% renewable instead of more oil and gas. But even if you make the argument for jobs and supplementing our energy needs, why the Christ would you still agree with what Shane Jones did last week? At the last minute, Matua Shane allowed these oil and gas companies off the hook for the pollution cleanup after their licence expires. You heard that right. Previously, Labour had passed law that said if you are the licence holder, you can't on-sell that licence near the end of the field life so as to avoid the pollution cleanup costs once you have taken all the oil. This exact thing happened during the Tui oil field debacle when New Zealand taxpayers were left with a $300 million cleanup cost. Why allow an oil company to take our oil, pay us a pittance in royalties, and then stiff us with the pollution cleanup costs? Surely you can't hate Jacinda, vaccines, Māori and trans people so much that you are gleefully willing to allow Matua Shane to give the oil companies a loophole so they don't have to pay for their pollution. Take a long, hard look at yourself, New Zealand. That's an insane outcome just to own the libs. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the Rover Network, sponsored by Wātea News. After the show, the Bradbury Group enjoys conviviality at 165 Ponsonby Road. Why not pop down, meet the show staff and plot the revolution? That's 165 Ponsonby Road, Tuesday night drinking at its best. Everything on the show is an opinion and shouldn't be taken seriously enough to attempt defamation action against us. We were joking. We're never serious about anything. And officially, a small wetter in Avondale is legally the owner. Good luck finding him. Don't forget to follow, like and comment.